Guys, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it, and I have to say that I respect your work is amazing. I love politics and I love all about the documentaries and all that stuff. So I really love your work, but I also respect your work. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank
Oh,
you.
thanks for having us, Anthony. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
I want to start with Abby. Your work often challenge dominant political narratives. And when approaching to Cuba after Castro, what preconceived narratives do you most want to interrogate or dismantle?
There are pre-existing myths that underpin and justify this horrific, barbaric policy that my government, the American government, has perpetrated against the Cuban quote unquote regime, right, for the last 60 years that has really been punishing the Cuban people, depriving them of just basic human rights. This is a suffocating, asphyxiating blockade, and it needs to be contextualized with the geopolitical, economic circumstances of why this has been imposed, why this bipartisan consensus against Cuba has been sustained for so long. It's basically been told to Americans that Cuba is this dictatorship that has no freedom of speech, no rights at all, and people are beating each other down to leave. And the thing is, that justifies, right, what the US has been doing to Cuba to asphyxiate their economy and to prevent them from just living on their own. So this is what we wanted to do. We wanted to humanize the Cuban leadership, go straight to the horse's mouth and actually confront him with these pillars of propaganda that justify, according to the world, right, what my government's been doing. But of course, according to the UN, they have been voting against this horrific blockade for decades. So again, this documentary was meant to humanize and kind of contextualize the situation to really try to reach people and understand why we need solidarity with the Cuban people and why we should oppose this crime against humanity, which is this blockade that is now ratcheted up into potentially a full-blown bombing campaign under the Trump administration.
Great. Matthew, as co-director and also as a Latino filmmaker, uh, how did your cultural background shape your perspective when documenting Cuba's social political realities? Did it influence how you connect with subjects on the ground?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, I'm born here in the United States, but both of my parents are from the Dominican Republic, from San Pedro de Macorís. And yeah, it was definitely something that was very a lot of the our coverage felt very familiar to me. Obviously, there's a lot of similarities between, Cuban, Dominican, Puerto Rican culture, whatever. But it was just fascinating for me to almost see like a different version of the culture that I'm already so familiar with, but one that uh seeing the differences of how that culture shapes out under entirely different, economic and political circumstances, right? I mean, the level of political consciousness of the average person that we spoke to, even just on the street in Cuba, be it a student, a worker, a government official, anybody, like, there's a very clear and present understanding of the geopolitical situation in Cuba and the relationship to the United States and how central that relationship is to an island nation just 90 miles from its shore. For them to have the sort of economic development necessary to meet the needs of their people, there is definitely a wide range of opinions, plenty of people who had very valid criticisms of the way the Cuban government handled this or that, but there was, by and large, you know, a very real understanding of the fact that, like, regardless of the position of the Cuban government or the composition of their government or their economy, you can't get around the major factor of the biggest global economic power just 90 miles from their shore, stopping the entrance of basically all products, foreign currency, in large part dictating the reality of the day-to-day lives for so many Cubans. And I think this is a sentiment that people all around Latin America can share in one form or another. I mean, look at a map of Latin America and find a place that the US hasn't invaded or bombed or, unilaterally sanctioned in one way, shape, or form or another. I mean, what we're seeing today is very much a continuation of the Monroe Doctrine and the US's perspective that they should be the hegemonic force for nations in their quote unquote backyard and even further, even outside of that sphere. So, you know, I, uh, I think that regardless of one's political leanings, we're trying to tell a very human story. We're trying to tell the story of the Cuban people and the very real and specific struggles that they've had to deal with for well over 60 years now, which are coming to a very ugly head currently.
Great. This one is for both of you. What does the after Castro really mean to you? Like, it is the political transition, is the generational shift, it is something more complex, maybe. What that means for you?
I mean, the Castros represented such a incredibly powerful and potent political project that transformed the planet and still basically symbolizes something that reverberates throughout the world, which exactly is why the US has tried to crush it in such a sustained fashion for decades. It's not because, Cuba has the largest oil reserves in the world like Venezuela. It's because of the symbol that they pose, right? To not be a complete subservient doormat to US imperialism. And it's that defiance that the Castros really, embodied. And people thought that it would die with the Castros, right? But I think the strength of the revolutionary project of showing how it continues to take new form and new shape. And Miguel Diaz-Canel is just simply the latest embodiment of this project that sustains and has survived under the boot of the world's strongest military power for decades. And that's an incredible thing, the resiliency of this small island nation to stand up against the most powerful entity on the planet. And Miguel Diaz-Canel is the representation of that. And so there's something really beautiful about exploring that because unlike the Castro brothers, he's not really one to, do these long speeches or sit down interviews with press. And so it was really special to kind of hone in, dive in on the huge contextual nature of why all these things are the way they are and how Cuba kind of serves as that important role for the world.
Yeah, and I think to understand the term Cuba after Castro, it could be. There's definitely, like Abby mentioned, a very real and strong continuity between the era of Fidel and Raúl Castro and Miguel Díaz-Canel. Díaz-Canel very much presents a continuation of the project set forth by Fidel and Raúl Castro. But one of the main differences is what how the Cuban people are managing to overcome these economic and social and political difficulties without the image of Fidel Castro, who himself was an incredibly, it can't be understated what a powerful and unifying figure he was just by dint of his image, a man who, fought in the revolution on the front lines, very much like brought forth so many significant economic and social changes within the country, which Diaz-Canel himself was a large beneficiary of, being born 1 year after the revolution. I think it's also worth noting that, Cuba after Castro also has a very the average young person in Cuba today has a very different perspective than the generation of their parents. Like they didn't get any of the, sweeping changes. They didn't get any of the economic benefits. What they largely saw, was being born into the special period after the collapse of the Soviet Union and a period of in large part deprivation, the likes of which we're still seeing the effects of to this day. But there's political consciousness is still at a very, very high level in Cuba, especially compared to, even frankly, the United States, and uh, and I think that it's very here in the United States we have very old, very caricatured ideas of what the Cuban government is, of what the Cuban people are, what the nation of Cuba is. And I think that, part of our project and calling it Cuba After Castro is to be like, okay, it's been a long time since then. Many things have changed, many things have not changed as well. But the fact of the matter is, there's a need for a large scale informational update, cultural update for the global media consuming audience as to what's going on in Cuba and the context as to why it is the way it is today.
Great. I have to wrap with this one, but I don't know if you already have worked on something like this or if you have plans to work with Puerto Rico. So Puerto Rico is a very interesting place because since 1898, we have been part of the United States somehow. In 1952, we have our new constitution, the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico, and all that stuff. But we're still being a second-class U.S. citizens. We don't have right to vote for our president. We have something named promesa that they take the decisions for the government to make their budget and all that stuff. We have been in a 12-year, I have to say, gap, having the same political party being the ones that have everything in Senate, there are the governors. There's a lot of things happening in Puerto Rico. Do you have plans to do something with Puerto Rico? I don't know.
We would love to, right, Matt? I mean, hey, first we gotta make everyone on board with stopping this crippling blockade against Cuba because people are dying every day, and it's a direct result of this policy, and it's completely barbaric and in violation of international law. But I totally agree with you. There's such a big problem, especially when you look at someone like Bad Bunny in the Olympics, and you had the Trump administration, all these white nationalists decrying the fact that a Puerto Rican represent America. Well, then, geez, it is America. I mean, it's just insane. It's like Chamorro people in Guam all know that they're American, but no Americans even understand that Chamorro people are American. And it's the same with Puerto Rico. It just shows the kind of imperial domination and chauvinistic arrogance when it comes to the willful ignorance of American citizens and the violation of rights for Puerto Rican people. We need full rights, all hands on deck, freedom for all, liberty for all.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, to answer your question in brief, we don't have current plans for that. I mean, we're like Abby mentioned, we're just like full tilt trying to respond to the current threats and imminent struggle in Cuba. As far as like the Trump administration's position of belligerence. But at least for me, Puerto Rico is never a struggle that's far from my heart. I have a lot of family in San Juan in particular, who I hope are maybe listening right now. And 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 yeah, I mean the Puerto Rican struggle should in fact be one that's almost more salient for Americans than anything else. But frankly, it's there, Puerto Rico finds itself in a position that is unique in some ways, but also not unique as far as the tack, generally speaking, that the United States has taken against Latin America and the overall, position that they take of being the ones being a dominating force in whatever country or quote unquote commonwealth that they would like to have their hands on. So, I think that this example of Cuba can stand as a as a hopefully something that someone in any nation, under the boot of neo-colonial control can use and recognize and see the example of Cuba as as something, however difficult the situation there is currently, it's something to aspire to and to recognize that it was a tremendous, tremendous victory over the greatest military in the world, over the biggest hegemonic power on the planet, And if Cuba, in its position of isolation, can endure for this long and still manage to, move its people and society forward, then I think it can stand as a great example for places like Puerto Rico and beyond.
Thank you so much, de verdad. Muchas gracias por su tiempo. Lo aprecio. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate
Muchas
that.
gracias. Muchas gracias. What made you leave that profession to then work for the party?
No sé si seré bueno. A ver, no la dejé para ser político y aquí hay todo un camino y hay un tránsito. Cuando yo estoy en el último año de la universidad, el país estaba sometido a un peligro de agresión grande. Era la época del mandato de Reagan. Se habían firmado los acuerdos de Santa Fe. Planteaban un programa donde la agresión a Cuba era casi eminente.
El gobierno de los Estados Unidos pensaba realizar la invasión a Cuba a través de los cubanos y latinos han reclutados en el ejército norteamericano y en los campamentos que se están habilitando y los que ya están habilitados al efecto.
Y en ese momento la dirección del país, el gobierno revolucionario, deciden de que hay que actualizar una parte de la tecnología con la cual Cuba podía garantizar su defensa, que como todos se conoce, era tecnología que venía de la Unión Soviética.
Mucho más al calor de una nueva situación mundial en que prácticamente estamos en los umbrales o de lleno ya en una situación de carrera armamentista y de guerra fría.